Okay, and we're recording. There we go. So welcome everyone to our March Indie End of Life Collective Gathering. Today we're going to talk to Tom Sproles. He's funeral director with Sproles Family Cares. Is that the name of it?
That's our website, Sproles Family Funeral Home in Newcastle.
Yeah, so thanks for joining us, Tom. My name is Angela. I'm the founder and the co-creator of the Indie End of Life Collective. And we are just a sort of a Indianapolis and surrounding area network for all things related to end-of-life resources. We have a proud group of professional and non-professional advocates who just have a lot of experience and wisdom and know-how of working in the end-of-life industry. And we're also just people who are curious and desire to obtain more skills to maybe serve somebody in their life who is at the end of life, or just for their own knowledge, so that if they are in a situation where they're requiring to care for somebody who is sick, dying, or dead, that they have the skills and the know-how of how to kind of navigate what I like to call the death system. So I've been really on this mission to increase death literacy in our community, especially this last year, where we're really seeing that we're talking about death and dying a lot more as a result of the pandemic. But I really think that even outside of that position, that it's just really great knowledge to have, because I believe that at some point in our lives, we're all going to need this information. Inevitably, we'll all either ourselves or have a loved one who is at the end of their life, and we may need to have this sort of information on how to guide them and make sure that that experience is as comfortable or safe and nurturing and loving to them and to ourselves as possible. And it is just a really difficult situation to go through, whether or not it's a planned situation or if it's a sudden death. So I just think that we really need more resources and education about these sorts of things in our community. And so that's sort of been my goal over this, especially this last year. But I've been really doing this since I was 19, when I went through caring for my mom at the end of life, and then professionally since about 2004, when I started professionally working in hospice. And then I later got into end of life doula work, which I've been doing for the last couple of years. So I am an end of life doula and a home funeral guide, which we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about home funerals, and I'm going to get into just a short PowerPoint presentation. And then along the way, we're going to invite Tom to kind of clarify some of the legal matters that might arise. It's really important to have a funeral director, sort of helping to guide along this process, especially in the state of Indiana. It is legally required to have a funeral director, and we'll kind of get into that more of kind of how things vary state to state. But I'm just going to get into a screen share here. Hopefully you guys can see this okay. Can you guys see this, the slides okay?
Yeah.
All right, cool. Today we're going to share, and before I get started, I kind of had this idea to invite in, if any of us want to invite in any ancestors of ours to be present with us during this presentation, feel free to say their name out loud or to yourself, or to write their name or names in the chat box. I would like to invite my mother, Diana Franklin, into this space. I feel that she's had a big part of my life's journey in doing this work. And so I definitely appreciate just to feel her presence around me. So if there's anyone in your life that you would like to invite into this space, then you're more than welcome to. So if you'd like to say their name first, go right ahead.
Well, I would invite my grandfather, Walter Thomas Sproles. He's my namesake, and he passed away the day after Christmas, just this past year. And so Walter Thomas Sproles was kind of my hero, and really in large part makes up who I am today. He was a very caring gentleman, kind, never heard him utter a cross word or a raised voice in my entire life. So Walter Thomas Sproles.
Thank you. All right, well, we'll go ahead and get started. Just moving some things around here so that it's not in the way. So today we're sort of just doing like a home funeral 101, sort of, so to speak. So we'll talk about what is a home funeral, why to have a home funeral, and then we'll talk about the safety, legalities, logistics of bringing a body home or keeping them home.
I'm so sorry. My internet froze on me, but I'd also like to just invite my grandmother, Mary Lee, and of course, Oz. Yes. Perfect. Sorry. Thank you.
It's okay. It's okay. Welcome. Welcome into this space. So the practice of home funerals and caring for the dead is ancient. This isn't something that was sort of recently invented. People, mostly women from all cultures, have been caring for their dead for a millennia. Having dead loved ones nearby. This is a quote from Elizabeth Heinemann, who I just discovered today. She's an author of a book that I'll pull up here in a little bit when we get to our resources. But I quoted her as saying, having dead loved ones nearby used to be normal. Nowadays, you are supposed to keep corpses in their proper place, a morgue, a funeral home, or just somewhere else away from the living. But this isn't the law. It's just that no one bothers to tell grieving families their options. And that's sort of the premise of what I like to just share is that, this is something we've been doing for many, many years, and we've just sort of gotten lost because we've professionalized death care. And although I have a very high respect for the death care industry and funeral directors, because what they do is an absolute gift. So I have zero attitude towards the industry. I know that there are a lot of arguments out there about, the necessity of funeral directors. 100 years ago, we were in a very different place than we are now, and especially in 2021. But that doesn't change the fact that there are still a lot of things that we can do as non-professionals. So this is really just about empowering people to do as much as they can while still enlisting the professional help of a funeral director. So it should really be a partnership in my mind. That's kind of how I see it. So the home funeral is really a movement. It's a movement that has certain goals. And if you're not familiar with home funerals, there is, and I'll share these resources at the end of the presentation, but the National Home Funeral Alliance is a great resource. And they've really done a great job. They have a lot of videos on YouTube about helping you to learn how to even do gentle care for the body if your body is at home, if your loved one's body is at home. So they've sort of outlined these goals. These are some things that I pulled down from their website. So their goals of the home funeral movement are to empower families to care for their own after death, educating the public to their innate family rights, promoting environmentally sound and caring practices, and supporting a healthy grief process after loss. And I really think that, like, the perspective for me as an end-of-life doula or a home funeral guide isn't specifically about defining what a home funeral is, but it's really, again, just about encouraging families to spend time with their loved one's body after death. So our role is really to advocate and educate communities, as well as healthcare providers, such as hospitals, hospices, to make sure that it's known to them that this is an option to bring their loved one home. And so it's not something that everybody wants to do, of course. Most don't. I would say most don't, but some people do, and especially in rare situations, that we're gonna hear Allie's story later about uh, her stillbirth situation. So I think a lot of times in those sort of situations, um, you know, when somebody loses a child, keeping that baby at home can be very, very healing and very important. So what is a home funeral? A home funeral generally involves keeping a loved one's body at home to lay in honor for 1 or more days. It is typically a pre-planned event, but not always. It's family-directed body care, which means, the family is involved in bathing the body, maybe anointing with oils, um, simple shrouding or dressing of the body. And this is meant to be done in a more of a ceremonial or in a ritual more than task oriented. So we're not necessarily bathing the body to wash it, although that can be part of it. This is really more to just take time, spending your time with the body, um, to really process what has happened. A lot of times, even if you see the death that is coming, the moment that it happens can be, it's a huge shock to our system, whether we're prepared, quote unquote, prepared for it or not. And it can take a long time to sort of process and integrate what has happened. So sometimes just keeping the body for a longer period of time than just maybe an hour or two can really just help to really help us process that the death is real, um, and just being sort of in a new relationship with this individual, with our loved one, as they are now deceased, as they are crossed over or in the other realm, or however you like to consider that. So again, these are family-directed ceremonies and rituals that usually involve immediate family. Um, and it's really nice because you're in sort of a familiar and safe environment that is, it's your home. It's where this person most likely lived with you, and it's their environment too. Um, so again, a lot of times families even like to be involved in the personalization of a shroud, caskets, which can even just be cardboard or a simple box. Children can decorate, maybe the box or decorate the shroud. So there's like a lot of different ideas that can take place, of having children involved in sort of that arts and crafts time to really help them integrate the death too, and make it so that it's not a scary thing that we're trying to shield them away from and hurry them out of the room, but we want to welcome them into the room and into the space. And I think that can be a really healing time, and it can be I think an educational time for children too, to learn that this is a part of life and it's nothing to be afraid of. But it's just something that happens, and yes, it's sad, but that these feelings are welcomed and safe and healthy and natural and that sort of thing. So I just talked about several reasons to why, but there are a few more reasons why. First of all, it is our legal right and a privilege to have a loved one at home for a home funeral. Again, it being family-led and family-directed is a great reason. As I mentioned, it helps us kind of integrate the loss, really taking time and slowing down. Oftentimes, when the person takes their last breath, there's this feeling that you have to rush and hurry to call the funeral director for them to come and take the body. And I know that funeral directors are generally that first sort of that, well, we call them the last responders, right, Tom? You're sort of the last responder, not the first responder. In certain cases of like in hospice, for example, where the death was expected, you know, they know generally going through that process that when that person dies, hospice will be notified, and then usually the second person notified is the funeral director. And I think funeral directors are usually pretty good about saying, hey, take your time and we'll come whenever you want us to come. But I think it's like the family who doesn't realize that that doesn't have to be like in an hour or two, that that can be even a longer spread of time. Like I said earlier, it can be a couple of days, but it of course takes planning. And that's why, you know, I do want to emphasize that this isn't usually something that you just spring on yourself or spring on your family. It does have to be planned. But there are a lot of benefits to doing it this way. You know, of course, it just a beautiful way to create meaning. And I think that really helps facilitate a really healthy grieving process for a lot of families. And of course, it can be even considered a more eco-conscious or cost-conscious way of doing things, if that is something that is important to the family. If costs are an issue, then it's just, again, another option that families have where maybe they could save that money that they would normally have to spend having the funeral with their immediate family in the funeral home. Maybe they could do that part at home. And then if they want to have a larger gathering somewhere else, like a funeral home or, you know, a church or wherever is special to them, then they can kind of choose that. But it's just an option to do it this way for like usually a smaller family gathering. So home funerals are legal and safe. It is legal in all 50 states to keep a body at home for a home vigil. Embalming is not required by law in any state. And I have, unless crossing state lines with a question mark. So Tom, you can kind of chime in if that is correct, but I think that is correct.
Sure. So I'll just chime in. There's a couple things that I have to say before I offer any type of guidance or advice. One is I serve on the State Board of Funeral Service here in the state of Indiana. I have for 7 years now, going into my 8th year. And anything that I have to say today, I will not be speaking from that standpoint. I will not be speaking as a state board member and nor will I be speaking on behalf of the state board. I will be speaking only as an Indiana licensed funeral director. I am not an attorney. However, I am pretty familiar with our book of laws that governs the funeral codes in the state of Indiana.
It's just a little pamphlet.
Yeah, little pamphlet we can go through in the next 15 minutes. So, but this is strictly my interpretation. I don't give any legal advice. I always recommend if there is any type of legal question that is of great importance, then let's get an attorney's opinion on it. But I do have 30 years of practical experience in funeral service. And so I'm happy to answer questions that are within my realm. I will happily correct you to say that, or not correct you, but I'm glad you put that question mark. There is no law that says embalming has to be done to cross state lines. We have lots of funeral directors who still believe that. Just about every board member will have a funeral director say, well, it was crossing state line. Well, where did that come from? That is old folklore or something. It is not, never has been. People will say you have to have an embalming because airlines require it, and airlines do not require embalming. We have shipped Jewish rabbis with dry ice from Florida to Indiana, and so there are ways around that. If someone does not want to be embalmed, there is no law that says that you have to be embalmed. I will say that funeral homes are given the latitude within the law to require embalming. Some funeral homes will not have a public visitation without embalming. So that is something that funeral homes are given the right to reject that. There are some funeral homes who will do that, but there is no law that says you have to be embalmed.
Thank you for that clarification. I have heard that so many times from, and even as literate as I am, I still wasn't sure, you know, so thank you.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, and I know we'll talk about a lot more things here, because like here even there's some questions about, you know, who has the full custody and control of the body. I know that can sometimes get a little hairy, and we'll talk more about that a little bit later.
That is one of the issues that we deal with the most, is who is authorized to care and has control and custody of the deceased. There is a very clear authorization line in our law, very, very clear. So it may be muddy in some people's minds. It's really not at all in the eyes of the law. So I'll be glad to explain that to you.
Okay. Yeah, great. We'll definitely get into that during the portion where we kind of talk about advocacy and logistics and all that sort of stuff. Just wanting to really drive home, though, the fact that they are legal and they are safe. So there can, you know, we can accomplish, you know, like slowing the decomposition of a body with simple cooling techniques that do not require embalming. I've directed families to use just simple ice packs that you have in your refrigerator. There are certain places that you want them to be placed, like the abdomen, you know, places between the thighs, the back, but it doesn't take very much. It's not like you have to douse them in ice. It's just, you have to make sure that they're kept cool, or maybe turn the air conditioner down in the home just to make sure that the air is cool, if it is, especially if it's summertime. There's also something called Techni Ice sheets that you can actually get on Amazon. And they come in flat sheets, which are really nice because they lay really nice and they're reusable. So those are just a couple of simple and gentle options. And we're not going to get into like the details, but there are other things as far as setting the features that are very gentle, using scarves, or, you know, getting the eyes to close just using simple, like a rice bag or a bean bag, for maybe half an hour to an hour, and that will help the eyelids to stay closed. So simple things that most people already have around their house. So as I mentioned briefly earlier, Indiana is one of 8 states where law requires funeral directors are involved in filing the death certificate and the final disposition of a body. So yeah, it's interesting to me that we're only one of 8 states. And that's, you know, Tom and I were kind of talking about funeral law that is a little bit more conservative here in Indiana than in other states. And this is just one example that I can come up with is, you know, we're one of 8 states where funeral directors have to be involved. So it's really good to have somebody like Tom, who is home funeral friendly, and he's very, very knowledgeable about the laws. And I think he is an advocate for families, of just to make sure that they get what they want within reason of the law, you know. And then of course, you know, it is every family's right to obtain or create and decorate containers from third-party vendors, purchase them from third-party vendors outside of the funeral home, as well as online. So that's an option that is available to families that maybe they didn't know. Maybe they thought they had to buy everything directly from the funeral home, but there are many other suppliers all around the country where you can, you know, if there's some other sort of product that, you know, maybe you're looking for more, you know, cost effective or even greener options, then you can obtain those sort of supplies from anywhere else that you want and have them sent to the funeral home for them to use. So funeral laws do vary from state to state, as I mentioned. Indiana law requires funeral directors to be involved in certain aspects of the funeral, which are pretty much all of them, from my handy dandy book called Final Rites, which has pretty much all of the state laws that dictate funeral law in every state. Um, so I just pulled that little bit down that here in our state, Indiana funeral directors have to be involved in planning, arranging the logistics, filing the paperwork, and the final disposition. As I mentioned, home funerals are typically a planned event. So it's really important to, again, work with a funeral director in our state of Indiana who's friendly and can help support the whole process. So at this point, I would like to invite Allie to share a little bit about her journey. And I kind of just have a couple of questions, but if you would like to just introduce yourself first, Allie, we would love that.
Unmute there. Hello, I'm Allie, and I'm excited to be involved in this, or have been invited to speak about our situation. But yeah, I really loved getting to be able to bring home. Angela stated previously, she feels that it's a great way to help facilitate the healing process. And I would agree. I think that getting to have her home and getting to take care of her was really a huge part of our grieving process and healing afterwards. We were able to bring her home, and before the funeral, we were able to prepare her body and use different techniques that my ancestors would have used as far as cleansing the body, wrapping. We had my mother-in-law was able to find the gown that her sister 70 years ago, and then both of my husband's sisters wore in their baptism. We were able to find, they were able to find that gown so that we could wrap her in that, and she was ultimately cremated in that as well.
What I thought was really beautiful about your entire pregnancy journey, from where I was watching sort of from social media, you had ceremony as a very important part of your entire pregnancy journey. Would you say, like, how would you say that ceremony played a role in your pregnancy throughout your journey?
Yeah. I'm actually someone who facilitates ceremony often in my life, and ceremony for me really connects me with my ancestors and the work that they did around pregnancy, birth, and so it was very natural for me for that to carry over into death as well. And I actually knew about I knew about the option to do home funerals from a birth midwife, actually, Wapio Bartlett, who does a lot of trainings around Indianapolis and actually all over the world. But she brought her husband home and talks fondly of getting to bring him home and talking to him, as she was cooking dinner, and she loved it. And so that's actually where the notion even came from when I said, hey, can I bring her home? And the coroner was like, I've literally never been asked that in 15 years. That was shocking to me. And not in a judgment way, just in a, oh my gosh, I can't believe that, this isn't done more often. And so, yeah, when I reached out to the page and Angela was like, here, contact Tom Sproles, I was on it immediately, and he really helped facilitate most of all of that process of he picked her up for me, and then he even dropped her off, and they were able to give us a lot of instruction. As you said, you have to be careful of how hot your house is. We run a fan in our bedroom every night, and it was really important to us that she got to stay in our bedroom like she would have. And so, you know, we were really careful on how high we set the fan setting, and things like that. So you do have to be cognizant. But I think it was much better for me having her here than knowing that she was in, you know, a cold morgue somewhere,
Right.
while we prepared for her ceremony. And then, and as I call it, a ceremony, not a funeral, but that is what I mean when I say ceremony. So I'll probably refer to it that way. But yeah, I got to, like I said, prepare her body, and then we sang songs. And while it was a very quote unquote sad time, it was a really beautiful way I felt to honor her. And you know, I got to have family pictures with her, the only pictures we would ever get with her, which we're a family that does family pictures a lot. So the notion that, you know, we would never get to really have her in that space again, was almost debilitating. So my sister-in-law, who's a photographer, was a part of that process, and she photographed us dressing her and saging her body, and I got to adorn her head with a little baby's breath crown, and really make her space just beautiful. I loved it. I talk about it as much as I'm able to. And then afterwards, we were able to, you know, give rings, do things that are kind of in line with our spiritual selves and that part of our lives. And yeah, it was just a really beautiful time. I think not only for us, but the people that were in attendance also, I think, got to feel something different. It wasn't, I joked with Tom that his funeral home is more like a home. It doesn't feel cold and stiff. So I could have actually been okay having her funeral there. However, my experience prior to visiting his funeral home was that they are very cold, very stiff, and I just couldn't picture doing that for Oslin. I couldn't picture being somewhere else and not getting to really honor her in the way that we felt was best. And so in hindsight, I would do it again a million times, you know, provided I had to. And it was fulfilling. It was everything I needed to be able to move forward in our process of grieving and healing after her sudden passing.
And earlier I mentioned Elizabeth Heinemann. Um, she's an author. She had a stillborn birth at home as well, and she said something that was really profound to me about that is the need to say hello. Like usually in a, you know, in a situation where someone has an adult or somebody has had a long life and we're sort of anticipating their death, we're sort of been, there's like this long goodbye, but like we've had them all of this time to enjoy and to get to know, and we have memories and stories and all of these, you know, experiences with this person, and then we're sort of focusing on this long goodbye. But in a situation where you've been pregnant and you're anticipating bringing this beautiful life into the world, like it's there, you need to say hello first before you can say goodbye.
Yeah.
And so like just having her home with you, did you feel that that gave you the opportunity to integrate her? Because that's what I witnessed from everything I've witnessed from your story has been that you integrated her into your family first, like that was really important to you.
Yeah.
Bringing her home and sharing her with your other children, and with the even with us as the community. Like I feel like I got to know her a little bit.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Yeah. I think that was a huge part of integrating her into the family. That was a great way to put it. You know, we had her kind of on a pedestal in our room, for the first night. And the kids wanted to be in here and wanted to sleep next to her. So while she was up higher, she wasn't on the floor. They, you know, created a camp set type thing on the floor right next to where she was. And then after her funeral, I got to, bring her in the bed with us, and she was in her, I don't know if you can see in the picture, there's a beautiful casket, but the insert comes out. And so I was able to kind of like hold her like I would hold her, if she was here and if she was alive. And getting to do that was absolutely therapeutic. Getting to nurse her sister while she was next to me was really therapeutic, especially because I had totally anticipated having to share myself with both of them, and kind of getting to have that experience of having them right next to me like that was so important for me and for my healing. And yeah, sharing her with my children, but especially the community, because I knew that I was doing something different. So much so that I, got CPS called on me, which is true to form really in my life. If you know anything about me and the choices I make as a parent, that was definitely one of the
that's
things. And not everybody was, so comfortable with it like I was. And I do owe that to, learn. I've been part of the death doula community now, I think about 4 years, though I've never really gotten to dive into working with a family. I had learned a lot of what I needed to know for this. And I know now that it was kind of not by chance that I knew all of the things that I was going to get to do, that were going to be differently, so that I could grieve in the way that I needed to. And I would say that it kind of set me on my journey. While it still hurts, and is a sad time in our lives, we're all doing really well. I know I'm in quite a few stillbirth groups that I joined after her passing to get support and learn about a bunch of things. And there's people, not in any judgment, but there's people 10 years in who are still it's still just as painful for them in 10 years as it was the day it happened. And that won't be the case for us. And I really do owe it to this part of our lives that we were really able to bring her home and honor her as a member of our family, because she didn't really, she wasn't shipped away somewhere. We got to keep her home until we were comfortable. And there did come a time where I had to call Tom and say, hey, I think we are complete. I think that we're ready to move on. And she had started to purple a little bit, and I wanted to remember her as she was, and not, see her get any see the death process happen anymore, especially for my children. And so he was like, all right. And so he came and got her, and then we got to visit her before taking her to get cremated the next day. And he had her just as beautiful as when she left us. And so the whole process, absolutely, I recommend. And now anytime I hear of someone who knows that they're going to pass, or has someone, has a child that has passed, I'm like, hey, you know that these are your options.
And that's what this is, really all about. And like, I think it's amazing that you had the energy and sort of the confidence to advocate for yourself during such an emotionally, hard time. Like, how did you cultivate that confidence to say, hey, this is what I want? Because I don't think that's the case for most women in that situation. I think they would just sort of take the first answer given and maybe wouldn't push or say, no, I think this is possible. How can I do this? So just what would your message be to other mothers or people in the situation that you were in, of like, how do you cultivate that confidence to advocate?
That's a good question. I think for me, it really isn't in my nature, unfortunately, to kind of push back and break barriers and not really fit the mold, if you will. So, right when I was, told that they weren't sure if I was going to be able to take her home, that's when I kind of went into action. So I would say like my biggest message is ask questions, or just vocalize what you do want, and maybe someone out there does know what you're able to do. If you're like, oh my gosh, I need to have this loved one home, ask questions, um, vocalize what you want. And even if it feels scary, it's okay. We all need and want different things, especially in that time. I don't think we really, especially when it's unexpected, I don't think we really know what we want. We haven't planned ahead for that. Especially in the birth community, I find that the death issue is hushed completely. We don't want to talk about it. We don't want to feed it. We don't want to give it fear, all that fear that women have so much anyway of losing their baby. Um, it's hushed. So even when you're asking questions prior to birth, I think that it's not talked about at all. I even heard a lot of times like it's just fear, because I kind of knew intuitively. I did know that something was going to happen. I didn't know it would have been this catastrophic, if you will, but I knew, and I kept being told it's just fear, it'll be okay. And in the end, it wasn't okay. And um I think we really need to change that in the birth community, which I think maybe my work is to bridge this gap between the birth and the death world, and that you can get through it and you can still breathe, and at the end of the day, and even though it does take a lot of your breath away, that you can be okay after losing your child, and that be okay. I've also felt almost shame in feeling okay, with the whole process, and with the fact that not okay that she's gone, but okay that I'm on the healing journey, okay that I'm not still heavily grieving every day, and you know crying till there's times it hits me and it does take my breath away again, and I get to sit with it and grieve and cry and scream, and then I get to move back on with my life, because for me, I refuse to sit in a space of turmoil longer than I need to. And so I really think that that's a big part of our work too, is getting the conversation of death out there, and how it's all okay, whatever we're feeling in the moment. And it's okay that women are still 10 years in and still have a lot of hurt, and that's okay. But I think that there's also a call to know that we don't have to live like that if we don't choose to, and that there's steps we can take in the process to help our journey along. I had posted at one point, like, hey, do moms even know this? And there were women, and they're furious that they didn't even know that bringing their baby home was an option. So I don't know really where that work is, if it's in hospitals and educating, those nurses and those doctors, like, hey, can you please tell them that they also have the opportunity to bring them home? I'm not really sure where that work is. And I feel that that was a big part of Oslin's purpose, was getting me to be able to vocalize that and be that bridge within the birth death community, that it's all okay. um, it, it's okay to not be okay, and it's also okay to be okay, if you've gotten the chance to grieve how you needed to. So I don't want
Absolutely.
to talk too much and take
No,
up.
this is so good. This is so great. Thank you so much. And you're absolutely right about advocating in, you know, atmospheres like in hospices and hospitals. And that's actually what we're going to talk about next. And I have this book that I received from the National Home Funeral Alliance that's called Building Bridges Along the Death Care Continuum. I don't know if you guys can see that, or do you need me to move it up or down?
It's good. I see it.
And it actually has, it's advocating for home for funerals and hospices, hospitals, and nursing care facilities. And it has examples of letters that, sample letters to hospices, sample letters to hospital administrators, um, about just what you just said, that this is an option and how to advocate for that. So that's something that I am working towards doing with the collective and in my work. So we can, yeah, that's definitely important, is to get in front of these individuals, because they just don't know. And that's kind of what we're going to talk a little bit about next. Um, so in different situations, like let's say that there's been a death at home, but say they're not on hospice services, that it maybe was a unexpected death. Um, Even we're trying to, in my family, sort of nail down exactly what is expected of us for if in the situation where my father was to have a heart attack. Um, it's my understanding that the authorities should be called as soon as possible, even if you're, I mean, even if you're just like, well, dad wouldn't want CPR, or dad, had a DNR. Even if that is the case, um, the authority should probably still be called to pronounce the death. But of course, if they're not a DNR and they do want resuscitation, then obviously we would call 911 and have the ambulances come. So Tom, I don't know if you can speak to that. Like, if somebody is a DNR, should the authorities be called right away, at least just to pronounce the person? And then is an autopsy always needed in that situation?
Sure. It's an excellent question. And before I answer that, I just want to say, Angela, how much I appreciate your spirit and your spirit of partnership and cooperation, and not being at loggerheads with our industry. So many times we do deal with people when you kind of get into the same space. Sometimes you have everybody butting heads, and what I've always found is, let's just work together. Let's just work together to meet everyone's needs, and everyone's needs varies. We deal with every type of religion imaginable, to not religion, to people who want home services, to people who want green burials, to people who want their loved ones' cremated remains turned into a diamond or shot into space in a rocket. Or to the ultimate traditional burial. So my philosophy has always been kind of a teach me philosophy. I'm open to you. You tell me what your needs are, and I will do my best to meet those. There may be some needs that we can't meet based upon regulations and things like that. But what I find is 99% of the time we can meet individual needs. And so, like Ali said, just ask questions. I just want to say too to Ali and to Scott, them allowing me to take care of their precious little Oslin and be with their family during that time, it changed me. It really, really changed me as a professional. We have a culture. Our biggest problem is culture changes over time, and it's not that the laws change necessarily. Our laws on the books don't prohibit home funerals at all. But what happens, and she mentioned she got CPS called, and I fielded a call from the Indianapolis Metropolitan Police Department, a detective. Is that we get in such a routine of thinking this is the way things are, that if anything changes, then suddenly we're thinking something's not right. And it's just that our culture has changed. And so home funerals have been around a lot longer than any other type of funerals. And so I just had a wonderful experience working with Scott and Ali, and it is Scott, right? That came to my mind, and I'm thinking, okay, good. I'm thinking I should have really looked that up. But then suddenly I thought maybe it was Steve. No, it was Scott. Okay. So I just wanted to say that what an honor and privilege it's been to work with you, Angela, to work with Allie, and such an honor to care for their precious little one. So what happens, back to your question, Angela, what I tend to recommend when there is an unexpected death, whether there's a DNR or not, just call 911. They deal with that all the time. If they come out and there is a do not resuscitate, then they won't attempt to do that. And they'll guide you through that process. I have had many times where someone did pass and they didn't call 911 and they called the funeral home directly. And so I had to spend some time, calling the doctor or calling the coroner. Sometimes the coroner then became involved, or if they were under a doctor's care and had been under doctor's care for quite a while, the doctor said, very familiar with the situation, I'll sign the death certificate. And then we didn't call 911. So it's not a necessity to, but I do tend to recommend that. They know then who to call and have a little more access to the doctors and things like that.
Especially if the death is not witnessed, like you'd come home and
if the death is not witnessed and it's
call.
unexpected,
Yeah.
then the coroner is going to be involved. Now, your question is an autopsy required? There are a lot of deaths that an autopsy is not performed. Maybe they'll do lab work and things like that. They'll do a physical inspection. The coroner will do a physical inspection and then call us directly. So an autopsy is not always performed, even if the death is somewhat unexpected. Of course, if there's any possibility of foul play or something like that, then an autopsy will be performed. But autopsies cost money, and our county budgets are overran anyway, and we are not performing near the level of autopsies that just 10, 15 years ago were being performed. So that is just something to answer that.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Uh-huh.
I did learn that babies do have to have an autopsy, right? Yep.
That's correct. Yes. Good clarification, Allie. Mm-hmm.
And then, so speaking to if somebody dies at home on hospice care, I've spoken to, I've worked in hospice and I've spoken to hospice nurses about this since since I got into this idea and started learning about home funerals myself. And what I learned is that hospice personnel are generally not aware of the laws and may even tell a family that it is illegal or unsafe to keep the body at home just because they just are not sure. Sometimes hospices may have their own policies that require them to be present until the funeral home comes to take the body. And I've heard of situations where, when this didn't happen, the body actually went missing and they didn't know what funeral home took the body. And so it caused basically a major problem between the family and the hospice company, because this is generally something that is already determined is what funeral home is going to take the body. And the family changed their mind, which is completely within their right to do so, but they didn't communicate that to the hospice agency. So it created sort of a logistical nightmare. So because of that, I think sometimes hospices do have this policy. So it's just something that I would recommend the family has this conversation ahead of time with their LCSW, which is their social worker, who they would have as a part of their care team. Generally, the social worker is the one helping them, connect them to making funeral arrangements or giving them referrals to funeral homes in their area. Advanced care planning can be a part of this if the family knows ahead of time. This is really important to us and our family that we keep our loved one home after they take their last breath, then that is definitely something that should be discussed ahead of time so that everybody's on the same page, the funeral home, the hospice, and of course, the family and whoever is involved in that care should also be kept in the loop. This is usually something that is, in this circumstance planned ahead, where you know that this is something that we're going to do, and just making sure that everybody's on the same page, I think, is really important. So is there anything, Tom, you'd like to add to that?
No, I think you summed it up very, very well. I will say that I'm seeing fewer and fewer hospices waiting till we arrive for some reason. I don't know if it's just been recently due to COVID or what, but or if they're just severely overworked. Hospices, they'll have a nurse covering a very large territory. And so if a death occurs, say in Noblesville, and I had this happen just the other day, the death occurred in Noblesville, the nurse assigned to them was in Bloomington. So that's 2 hours, 2.5 hours away. And so they were not there at all, did not show up, were not there at all. And I'm seeing that more and more frequently, which surprises me. Typically, the hospice nurse will be there when we arrive and is there to give us the time of death, to let us know what doctor is going to sign the certificate. But I'm seeing fewer and fewer hospice nurses present when we arrive.
That is really surprising.
Yeah.
We have somebody late showing up late here. I'm going to let her in. That is really surprising because I thought the nurse had to come and pronounce the time of death and make sure that the person is in fact dead before the funeral home comes. That is really surprising that you're seeing that. Then we'll talk a little bit about in nursing homes. Typically, facility administrators or the personnel might not be aware of the laws, or they might have their own body release policies. Nursing homes do not have an ability to store bodies. They don't have a morgue or any sort of refrigeration. They don't have the type of staff to accommodate sort of lengthy vigils and ceremonies. So sometimes and also sometimes there's a roommate present in the room who might not appreciate having, a dead neighbor in their same room with them, or, having the family coming in and doing these type of ceremonial practices with them present in the room, which is understandable. So sometimes nursing homes have a policy that the body has to be taken within 2 hours or less. So again, this is an important conversation to have with the facility administration ahead of time. Knowing, what is the law, you as the advocate, as the family member, knowing the law to educate the facility, because this is probably this could very well be the first time they've ever had that request. Like you said, Allie, like the coroner said, nobody's ever asked me to do this before. That could very well happen in this situation too, where they've never had this request and they might look at you a little strangely. That's okay. Just be patient, know the law, know your rights, and also be understanding of the nursing home's responsibilities to the body and why they have these policies, because they generally are for, protection, but also because they just don't have the resources to, maybe keep that body longer than is desirable for you. We kind of touched on this earlier, and we can go into more detail now about who has the right to claim the body. And I think sometimes that's a part that the nursing home wants to be very clear on before they go ahead and release a body to a family member. They want to be very sure that this family member, in fact, is the next of kin, or it does have the legal right to the body. So, Tom, have you had any situations like this?
Oh, yes, we've had many, many, many situations like this. As you can imagine, with families, there are all kinds of situations. We have more and more families who are fractured and splintered and unresolved issues. So the law makes very clear, delineates very clearly who is legally authorized to have custody of the remains, as well as arrange for final disposition. And it may not be who you think it is. And so we would naturally think if a spouse passes, then if my wife were to die, then I've got the legal right, and normally we would, but there are certain circumstances where that is not the case. In Indiana Funeral Code, first and foremost, there is what is called a funeral planning declaration that dictates who is legally authorized, and it can be the deceased's longtime girlfriend that the family never knew about. It can be an attorney. It can be someone who is not related to the family at all. And so there are legal forms in the state of Indiana that can dictate who has the final care and custody of the remains. Now, typically it follows a line. First is the funeral planning declaration. Then the second is a form specific for those who are in the military and active duty, an emergency form that they fill out when they enter active duty. Then that sets forth who is legally responsible. Past that, then we get into what we would call, there is a health care power of attorney. Most powers of attorney ends upon death. People say, well, I'm the power of attorney. Well, you were the power of attorney. The power of attorney ended at death. There are durable power of attorneys that go past death for certain items. If a family presented me with a healthcare durable power of attorney that specifically gave them the right for final disposition, then I would have to honor that. Very, very rarely do they contain that wording. However, it is in our right of disposition law. Then it would follow, as you would think, a spouse. Then you would go to adult children, and the majority of the adult children. So if there are 3 children and one wants mom cremated and the other 2 does not want mom cremated, then mom does not get cremated. So that's how that works. And then it would go to siblings if there are no children. It would go to siblings, and then on down the line, all the way down to where, a public trustee or even a friend who is willing to take responsibility in some cases where there's no family present at all. So
yeah, like there's in our Indiana law, I was trying to find the exact wording, but it's basically that if one of the, say the children, there's multiple children, and it says if they have a written objection to
right.
whatever their wishes were, then like it creates a lot of problems because it's the way that it's written in the law. If there's a written objection from another adult child.
Okay.
So I'm sure that's really
that was perhaps old law in Indiana.
Okay.
That is not the case now. They can have a written objection. They can have a temper tantrum and throw a fit if they would like. But and here's how the law reads: the decedent's surviving adult child, or if more than one adult child is surviving, the majority of the adult children. However, less than half of the surviving adult children have the rights under this subdivision if the adult children have used reasonable efforts to notify the other surviving adult children of their intentions and are not aware of any opposition to the final disposition instructions by more than half of the adult surviving children. So more than half is if there's more than half. However, if there's less, we have it sometimes where there's 2 children and one son has been estranged from the family for 30 years. They don't even know where he's at. And there are some laws that help us with that as well. But as long as he has made a reasonable attempts to contact the person, and doesn't know that person would be an objection to, the type of disposition, then it's typically okay to go ahead with that.
Yeah.
There's a lot of issues we see surrounding that right there. A whole lot of issues.
And adult children, meaning everyone 18 and older?
18 and older. It can
Okay.
even legally adopted children that as well.
Okay. And so this is I feel like this is why it's so important that someone communicates what they want before
Right.
asked, right? So that
Yeah.
they don't have, so even if the children want something different, if the person has it written in their will, do they go with what the person wants?
No.
Oh,
They typically, let me just say this, the wishes of a deceased family member trump about any wishes that are out there. And it's very, very rare that even if a family, even if the children do not want, let's just say they're opposed to cremation and mom wanted to be cremated. Typically they're going to cremate mom because that's what mom wanted.
okay.
Or it may be in a purple casket they think is awful, but that's the one mom wanted. And so that's what we're going to get. So it's very rare to see a family go against a parent's wishes because they're that strong. But legally, unless you have, this is where the funeral planning declaration came into being, where you can actually set your wishes and make sure that they're carried out exactly the way you want them to be. So that trumps everything else.
Okay.
So, but if it's just a standard, mom passed away and she had written down here that she wanted to be buried beside of our stepdad, and we hated him, and we want him, even though they were divorced, we want her buried beside of our dad, then they can have her buried beside their dad.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Mhm.
Interesting.
Yeah, it is.
Is that, sorry, is the funeral declaration something that has to be set up with a lawyer, or who does that work?
Yeah, it does not have to be set up with a lawyer. It is a form that is available. Typically, attorneys do have a part in it, but they don't have to. I've had many families use this form and they never sought an attorney. But it is available online. You can download it at the Indiana Funeral Directors Association website, or you can get with Angela and I could email you a copy of that.
Yeah, I'd like a copy.
Yeah.
Are you guys on the Indie End of Life Collective email chain?
I am, and I asked the question. Yes, thank you.
Okay. Tom's email, well, no, I have to fix it because I have to fix Tom's email on the thread. Okay, never mind. We'll all get together after this and make sure everybody has each other's correct contact information.
Sure.
I forgot I had that problem.
One thing that I always tell families, if they are using the funeral planning declaration, and I would really make sure that's what you want to do because it is totally legally binding. There is one caveat that I find a lot of people don't look closely enough, is you have to have a means to pay for your request. You can put down that you want to be buried in a solid bronze casket and be buried at Crown Hill Cemetery next to the most famous person, and the grave space be $10,000. But if you don't fund that, then it voids the planning declaration. So you have to be able to pay for your wishes in order for those to be granted.
Makes sense.
Yeah. Thank you for that too. Clarification. So then we'll just sort of talk about, from a hospital, similarly to advocating to bring somebody home from the nursing home. The hospital staff may not know the laws, or they might have their own policies onto who they can release the body to, which in the state of Indiana is the funeral home. It has to be a funeral director that they release the body to. They cannot release it directly to the family, even if they wanted to. It's illegal. So it's important to, as the family member, to speak to the policymaker within the hospital administration, or somebody who clearly knows the policy, just to get that information, and that's more speaking into other states that don't require a funeral director be involved. in our state, it is pretty cut and dry. You do have to have a funeral director come and pick up the body. However, sometimes hospitals are a little bit more willing to let you spend some time with the body maybe than in nursing homes. And I don't know this to be factual or not because I've never personally had the experience, but I know just from hearing stories, especially over the last year with COVID, that hospital nursing and staff have been really gracious in letting families spend some time or even do certain rituals or ceremonies in the hospital room. In cases of COVID where it's not possible to bring the body home, it would not be safe in that situation. So a little bit of a different situation than dying of some other cause. But so sometimes, that option is available, just spending more time with the body. At least it doesn't necessarily have to be a home funeral. But again, like I said earlier, it's just really about making sure families know that they can spend more time with the body in some way. So
Angela, if I could jump in right there and
yeah,
just say, from a funeral director's perspective, in our changing culture, and I so love it when I hear you say spending more time with the body, spending more time with their loved one. That is the very beginning of healing. And the need is so great. And we have basically eradicated just about any death symbol in our culture. Used to, I can remember as a kid growing up in Tennessee, and then North Carolina, my dad, who was a minister, we'd be going down the road, maybe going out to get a milkshake or something. The brakes would slam on, and my dad would say, "Oh, looky there. There's a death wreath on the door," and most people today wouldn't even know what a death wreath.
I've never seen one.
That old
I
country
would slam my
song?
brakes if I did, though.
Yeah, you know that old country song, "He Stopped Loving Her Today" by George Jones, probably the saddest song out there. They placed a wreath upon his door. Soon they'll carry him away. He stopped loving her today. So yeah, they would place a black wreath of flowers on the door, so everybody went by knew there was a death in that home. We would wear, not that many years ago, people would wear black clothing, or the pallbearers wore black bands. It was just to say someone in our community has died. Let's give deference and honor to this person who is grieving. Well, we've taken away the ultimate death symbol in that today we have a big celebration, and the guest of honor is not even invited to their own ceremony. We don't want the dead body. We don't want any tears. We just want to have fun, celebrate. But when I hear people say, "I want to do everything I can to facilitate families spending more time with their loved one," that is how the healing process starts. Like you said earlier, we have to say hello before we can say goodbye.
Right.
And we can't bypass the hard work of grief.
You're so right.
And so that our loved one, my grandfather, being there and me spending time with his body this couple of months ago, it was vital to us. It was vital to us. And I'll do whatever I can to facilitate families getting to spend more time with their loved one.
Yeah, I know I've heard a couple of my clients say things like, "I just don't want to remember them that way. I don't want to remember them dead." So what would you, I have a hard, I respect that. But I think I still go back to, it takes time to really integrate the reality of death. And so when we push it away, I don't know, that's what I go to. But what have you said to families who might say something like that?
Well, here is what I would say to families who would say, "I just don't want to remember them like that." Well, the very last memory that they're often having of their loved one is in a hospital strapped up to 19 machines, and it is not a peaceful memory at all. And so when we can create a very peaceful and restore that person back to more of a life-like appearance, what they're used to, that's going to be their final memory picture, not the one looking gaunt in the nursing home after not being able to take anything in for the last 2 weeks. but they're going to have all the memories anyway in their entire life. They're going to have all the memories. And I think that death is, as long as there's been life, there's been death. We are capable of getting through this, as horrible and as sorrowful and heartbreaking as loss is. We are capable of getting through that. But what I'm seeing is people trying to bypass the hard work of grief. And so they try to compartmentalize that, and then down the road, 3, 5, 10 years later, they're self-medicating, they're in a mess because they didn't, as Allie and Scott and the entire family, they leaned into the grief. As hard as it was, as much as it hurt, they leaned into that and they embraced that. And I knew going away, when I left the house for the final time, I knew that Scott and Allie and their family were starting out on a very healthy grief journey. Yes, it was hard, but they are, and so it doesn't surprise me today, a few months later, hearing how she is not, grieving daily, although grief comes in waves, but just the heavy burden of initial grief is already subsiding. And that's because they leaned into it. They felt it. Today in our culture, we don't want to feel anything. And we certainly don't want to feel pain. And there's a lot of people today that just can't sit with pain. And so it's healthy to spend time with their loved ones. Yeah. And I've walked out of the room so many times with someone's loved one, knowing that was the last time they saw them, and that's their final memory picture. And it wasn't a good memory picture. Look at those absolutely beautiful pictures of Oslin there in the family picture and in their own home, and that envelops you with a level of comfort that is not easily attained, and most people don't get that. And so I just wish more and more people would not discard. Yes, we know that their spirit is gone, but I'm telling you that body that animated the life of our loved one is still a very precious thing to me. And so the more time we can spend, it integrates it. We know the loss has occurred in our head, but it's got to get to our heart. And if we block that, then we're blocking some healthy grief.
Right. That was just so great. I just want to give it a moment to sink in. It's very powerful. I think we learned so much through despair. That's something that's been a relatively new lesson for me. Not only as it relates to the losses that I've personally experienced, but I mean, what I see around me in our world. Everybody is going through some level of sadness and despair, I think now, whether it relates to human loss, environmental disasters, ecological, and like I said, environmental extinctions. They say we're in our 6th extinction now, as our world is just going through a lot of climate change and things of that nature. So I feel that a lot of people are feeling the very heaviness of these realities. And there's so many losses that we're experiencing, that, yeah, it's very tempting to just want to turn off the radio, turn off the TV, don't read the article, shoving it in your face again and again, to remind you of this reality. But it's something that I'm really learning, even in all of my work in death work. I'm still learning how to really embrace despair. because it has a lot to teach us, and it's not about being stuck in it and letting it consume your life, but it has a message for us. And grief, I think, is really, it's just love overflowing. I mean, it's residual love
Mhm.
that is everlasting for whoever or whatever we are grieving, whatever that loss is. It's just that we love it. It's just the other side of love. So it's nothing to push away. It's something to be shared and honored and celebrated. And that's why earlier, you know, to start, I wanted us to bring in those people, because I don't think we say their names enough. In our Western culture of, you know, after we have a loss of somebody, we sort of, I think it's unintentional that we don't talk about them anymore. And I think that should change. I think we should still invite them into our spaces and say their names. And, you know, in Black communities, you know, you'll see them wearing T-shirts of their dead person's name on them, rest in peace, whoever their name is. And I think that's a really beautiful way of honoring. So I learned from those cultures, and it's not to appropriate that for us, but it's just, it's something that I look to those cultures to learn something. Like, wow, like they've really figured it out of how to invite death into their life and embrace it. And they're very celebratory about it. So, yeah, it's just that, you know, we've really gotten away from that in sort of European Western society. And it's something that we just have a lot to learn, I think. And to each their own. It's not that there's a right way or a wrong way. But I just think that the grieving has been very pushed down. And like you said, Tom, that's, you know, that is, I think, what contributes to the drug abuse and alcoholism and mental health disorders and things along those lines, is because we just don't know how to embrace it or talk about it, or there's not enough spaces created. I don't think public spaces to share and talk about it. So
Just
something I'm still learning.
few years ago, when the Egyptian flight crashed outside of New York City upon takeoff. I forget the flight number of that, but there were family members who immediately came over, and they went to the crash site. And in that culture, there is what is called keening. I don't know if you're familiar with that terminology, keening, K-E-E-N-I-N.
Like wailing?
It's wailing, it's guttural sounds, it's us resisting the reality of death. It's their way of grieving. And so they got over here and they're keening, which is very normal in their culture. And so immediately we got American psychiatrists out there prescribing medication for them because they were expressing their emotions in that manner. And that it was just so telling to me that that's how our culture is. We can't handle, you know, you want to clear out a room in the funeral home, let you know, the spouse or a child just lose it in front of everybody, and everybody will just leave. We can't deal with these emotions. You know, and I always hear this question, well, how is you know, Sally doing? Well, she seems to be holding up real well, you know, she's not crying or anything. So that's strength to them. When in all honesty, if she was doing really well, she may be curled up in the fetal position on the floor in front of the casket, grieving the loss. But this is our culture, and we have to educate people to change and to embrace the emotion of grief, emotions of grief.
Absolutely. Thank you.
So true.
We're gonna wrap up shortly. I could keep you guys all night, but I love this conversation. I knew we would go over an hour today, so we're still looking good. So thank you guys for this amazing conversation. I just want to just share a little bit about what home funeral guides and doulas sort of in common do, as far as, you know, educating about these choices. like we've spoken a lot about today. It's just knowing that this is an option to you. It's not something that maybe you have to do or you even want to do. But like you said, Allie, earlier too, it's just letting other mothers know, or anyone in our community know that maybe is anticipating a death, know that, hey, have you thought about this? And maybe they just haven't. They've never been proposed this idea, and maybe it is something that they'd like to look into and gain more knowledge about. So just that level of informing and then knowing the laws and the policies. And so somebody like myself or Tom, somebody who's well versed in the laws and how to make that happen, we work together, in making that, be able to be realized. We advocate with other medical providers, such as hospital administrators, physicians, to make this possible. Sort of in deeper home funeral work, there are a lot of videos put out by the National Home Funeral Alliance that do demonstrate body care techniques. So I recommend going to YouTube and looking some of those videos up if it's something you have interested in. Making sure the family knows that they are in charge at all times, that they, making sure they are maintaining their sense of autonomy, empowering them to do so, I think is my number one goal. It's not directing them of what to choose or not to choose, but just empowering that, hey, you're in the driver's seat and this is your journey. This is your body. This is your choice. Of course, partnering with these caregivers, these family caregivers who, again, they just don't know that this is an option to them. This is something that's completely new and maybe foreign to them, and they might need a little bit of guidance. So the other thing I will add is that as a doula or home funeral guide, I am not legally allowed to accept money to do any sort of body care. That would be falling into the territory of a funeral director. So I'm very careful about that. But what I can do is provide advice and guidance. And so that is what I do, sort of more on the educational side, or I've done it by phone for a friend of mine whose father died on hospice at home. And she called me when it happened and she goes, "What was it again that you said to do?" She said, "There was something you said about washing his body." And so I just kind of guided her through that with, to get out the bowl and some towels and some lavender essential oil and play some music. And I told her to breathe and just go through it very slowly and be very present for this moment, that this is this is her moment with her dad in a very new way. So I was completely within my scope to do that. And so just as an example of what we can do as doulas, that we have a very defined scope, and that it kind of involves some of these things. And then these are some resources to note or take a picture of if you want to do a little bit more research on your own and learn. The National Home Funeral Alliance is a membership, but it is completely free to join. They don't charge their members to join. Sometimes they'll have webinars similar to mine where you might offer a donation to attend, but usually they're available by replay, whether you donate or not, I've noticed. So it's kind of nice that they have these sort of resources, and they're more general. Of course, like our laws vary from state to state, but they have a lot of great general information about how to accomplish home funerals. So I'm going to stop the share. Did anybody need an extra minute on the screen, or you good? All right, so we're back. I want to say thank you to you guys. I really appreciate you being here. Is there anything else anyone would like to share or add?
I just want to say thank you so much. It was a wonderful presentation, Angela and Tom, but also Allie, thank you for sharing your beautiful baby with us. The pictures of her, that precious little soul, will live in your heart forever. And thank you for sharing that with us. I've spent
Thank you so much.
80 years in hospice. And so I just, as Angela was alluding to, there's a lot of people and a lot of different customs and cultures, and we just honor whatever they want that makes them happy and content, so that they have and find some closure, but never forget it. And you just did a wonderful thing for your children and your family and for yourself by reaching out and doing what you wanted to do. It was your child. You needed to do what you wanted to do. So, but thank you for sharing that with us. My goodness.
Oh, thank you so much. Anytime I get to talk to her about it, talk about her is an honor. So,
And a beautiful little name. I will always remember that name now.
oh, thank you. Yay.
So I'm going to hop off because I need to get on another call. But thank you, everyone, and
Thank
You know-
you, Penny.
Here.
the work they're doing.
I'm going to stop the recording here. Hang on one second.